Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm your co-host, Roshan Erik, here as usual with Eric Olson and Adrian Nicholson. Gentlemen, how are you guys feeling today?
I'm doing great today, Roshan. It's good to see you. Good to see you too, Eric. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. The purging process continues, man. We're emptying out the house at a pace never seen before. I think I've taken about probably four dumpsters full, or at least those large recycling bins, the curbside recycling bins. 4 of those full of paper, several trash cans full of stuff. I'm taking a bunch of books to the thrift store today. It feels awesome.
How long have you been in this house?
22 years.
Okay, so you've got a lot of stuff you've accumulated over that time.
That is so true. Yeah. So, and my wife, she loves this process. I don't think I've seen her as happy in quite a while.
Getting all this stuff. You're going to finish emptying the house out, and then you're going to say, do we really want to move still?
That's possible. Although I did rent a storage shed on the other side of the lake now. I've priced the truck. We're looking at apartments to kind of using that sort of as a base camp for a while and explore the neighborhoods and figure out which of the areas would be best both for opening a second office and for living. And so it's exciting. But yeah, so we're doing well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. A busy year for you.
Yeah. So how about you? What's up?
Everything's going well. I've got a little bit of a cold, which you can hear. So when I take the kids outside, we're really not going many places still. But as I'm outside, if I'm coughing, I feel like saying to people, I promise I don't have the coronavirus. It's
That's
just
right.
a cold. We don't see many people, but yesterday we didn't have our neighbors out.
Yeah, God forbid you have hay fever, because then you're going to sneeze.
Yeah, exactly. But no, everything's been going well. Adrian, how about you?
Yeah, everything's been great on my end. I actually moved into a new apartment, and I'm right there with you, Eric. It can be a lot all at once, just moving furniture around and just trying to get settled in. But everything else on my end's been pretty great. I'm excited for another podcast today. I'm really excited about this topic we're going to cover.
Yeah, so today's an interesting one. As a lot of you have probably heard, there's been a lot of talk over the last few years of the FIRE movement, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. I know I've had this discussion with a few people, and I've thought for myself personally, I like the FI part, the financial independence, retire early. Some people want to keep working. I'm one of those that I think I'd keep going, and I know a lot of people like that. But either way, I like our topic today. And as we were discussing this, we found an article that's on CNBC that's titled, "Don't Be Fooled by These 6 Biggest Lies About Early Retirement." This was written by Sam Dugan, who's a contributor to CNBC. And we wanted to just give you our thoughts and our take on those 6 things. So, gentlemen, if you don't have anything to add before we jump in, I'll start with the first one.
Well, I will just add one thing, and I think it's why is this an important and interesting topic? I think a lot of times our clients are not as young as we'll discuss, I'm sure in just a minute, as Sam and his wife were when they pulled the trigger, but they are asking questions about what is that. First of all, when can I pull it off? And number 2, what's it going to be like when I do? It's going to be a big adjustment. It could be a big life change. What does that really mean for us? And how do we anticipate that in a way that reflects or is informed by the experience of others? So we're using, I think, the occasion of this article for someone who sought to retire at a really early age, by most, in context at 34. But at the same time, the lessons that he and his wife drew and how they planned for it, prepared for it, and then adjusted their style of living in order to make it workable, I thought was really good stuff. So I think this, for anyone, whether you're thinking, oh, they're 34 when they retired, it doesn't apply to me. No, actually, I think there are a lot of the elements of their story that have relevance for all of us.
I agree. And the a title has the words early retirement in this, but I think a lot of this applies to everyone, regardless of the age. A lot of these pieces.
Great.
All right. So the first one he says is the younger you retire, the more you risk running out of money. And so, in your experience, Adrian and Erik, have you seen clients that where this is a concern? Running out of money is definitely a concern. It's a top concern for anyone retiring. But the myth that the younger you are, the more likely you are to run out of money. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, Roshan, it's kind of vary to person on this one. If you retire younger, it's kind of considering where your assets are right now, how your cash flow is. Do you have an emergency fund? What type of investments do you have that will help carry out your entire life? So it's about where you're really pulling your money from, I think is extremely important. And if you are ready to take that step, I like what they said in the beginning of the article, that it is a lot of planning and you have to be disciplined. I think that's more important than ever, maybe the younger you are when it comes to retiring, being able to plan for any emergency expenses, any scenarios that come up that might affect your assets or require you to pull from those assets is extremely important. And just being able to be disciplined. I mean, you're allowed to make changes, you're allowed to make mistakes, but the more those happen, the more unexpected events come on, then it will really test out your plan. So I think that's really important to really look at. What do you think, Erik?
Well, so the title of the article is about myths, and so this is characterized initially as a myth. And I think in some ways the framing of the article's main so-called myths is designed to get you to actually read the article. So in this case, some of the things that he says as he tries to elaborate on this myth, I think actually I agree with the subpoints. I don't agree in the rawest form with the headline on this particular point, which is the younger you retire, the more you risk running out of money. All else being equal, that's undeniably true. But that's where the caveat is in the all else being equal. And so as you pointed out, Adrian, they went through a process of several adjustments, including planning carefully to see whether or not they could pull it off. It wasn't just a willy-nilly, whimsical sort of thing. I think we have enough money. They went through that process and they went carefully. They also have a lot of passive income. And so I don't think we've mentioned yet that they retired at 34 with a net worth of $3 million. So $3 million as of net worth and passive income from both investment income and rental income off of commercial properties that they own supplies $80,000 a year. And they adjusted their spending. So they practiced living on less before they retired so that they'd know whether or not they could do that. I think that's actually great advice. If you're thinking, oh, it'll be a cinch for us to live on less, good, practice it. See if you can do it for a year or two before you actually pull the trigger. And if you can, then you're in much better shape to not be, not kidding yourself about what it's going to take.
Yes, and Erik, I agree with your breakdown very much. I was thinking the same thing. First is, I believe it's a fact that the younger you retire, the more you risk running out of money. Like how do you? I think that's true. Now his response to that is you'll do everything to ensure you won't run out of money. So what he's basically doing is he's betting on the retiree that you will figure out a way to make your money last. So what I like about the statement is I'm an optimist. I believe that people will figure things out. What I don't like about it is I would think that's a terrible retirement plan to say, hey, I'm just going to figure it out along the way. Right. That's not a plan. Right. That's just saying you're going to figure something out. So while I don't think you should delay your retirement because if you really want to retire and leave the position you're in, and you think you might be able to, I would say, look, figure out a plan and figure out a way to make it happen. Don't just retire and say, I will figure it out later, because luckily for Sam and his wife, they don't have to go back to work, but that is a reality for some people. They retire and go back to work. And I've actually had, I think of a client who retired, and she was actually fine to retire at about 50. And then she had a series of life changes, late in life marriage, expenses go up, that kind of thing, where she actually wasn't fine anymore to retire later on. So she's working part-time, and I think she's happy with that. But she did say to me once, well, if I knew this was going to happen, I probably would have just worked a couple more years. Right. So, and I bring that up because, yes, we will adapt and adjust. People will do that. But if your plan is, I'm going to adapt and adjust and figure out a way, I don't think that's a very good plan. Next item he touches on, he said, you'll have to cut back on spending to save money, and it will suck. Since Adrian started on item 1,
do we
Eric,
use that word on our podcast? Do we bleep that one out?
I don't think so. I don't think we need a parental advisory for that one.
We'll have to put a age 13 rating on this or something.
On this, yeah. So what do you see, and what are your thoughts on that? With when you typically have someone retire, do they, regardless of age, do you typically see them cutting back on spending?
Well, why don't you respond first?
Well, I don't always see that, right? So once again, this is a myth, and they're debunking the myth. He's saying that saving doesn't have to be miserable, and that it's about what you spend. So I have had clients. I've had both things, actually. I've had clients where when their retirement hits, at least in the first few years, their spending goes way up. And I've had clients where just naturally, because they had work-related expenses, their spending goes down. So in the article, he says that their income went down by 80%, and what surprised him was that he was spending 30% less than expected. So and when he said that sentence in particular, to me sounds like natural spending decline. So I think there are some natural expenses that'll go away. So it doesn't have to be. I guess I would agree that this is a myth, that a lot of times people will naturally spend less and it won't be painful.
Yeah, Roshan, I'm right there with you. And they also mention alternatives. I think that's a pretty important part in this myth or lie, so to speak, where alternatives is something you should really consider or look at, because maybe that could reduce your spending. You might be able to get the same amount of pleasure from it. That's what we talked about in our first season, Your Money or Your Life. Looking for alternatives that might give you the same satisfaction, might be help out your financial plan even more, or really help you cut back on your spending. It's just an adjustment phase, and your spending is going to fluctuate a lot in retirement, especially in the first year, because you're really trying to get into that new routine, those new habits. So being able to monitor it, I think, is extremely important when you're in that adjusting phase.
So I think you have to take his statement and divide it into two parts to say which you agree with and which you don't agree with. And that is, must cut back spending. So that's part A. I would say, well, if you're already at a fairly low level of spending, then you don't maybe need to cut back. But as he pointed out, I think the critical point that he's making is that it will be unpleasant. The part about that is that as he points out, you can learn to live with that, just as you both have said. So I loved the couple of examples he gave. One was instead of eating down in the downtown district for lunches, because that's where they worked. He was in investment banking. and having to spend $50 on a steak at lunch. Instead, you can go to In-N-Out Burger and spend $2.50. I thought, perfect. I mean, that's exactly right. And so from that standpoint, if you're if you're going to read a book, hey, just go to the library. They're free, and you can borrow as many and read as many as you want to read. So you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on that sort of thing. So I think the critical point that he made that I really thought was important is that reduced spending and reduced happiness are not necessarily hand in hand. And you can find a way to have a lot of happiness and a lot of joy even if you reduce your spending. So I love that point.
Yeah, I agree. I was definitely on board with it. Where the part where I had a different perspective though is I've just seen people who don't always spend less.
I agree.
Right. So
yes. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a broken record when I say this, because I feel like I say this every recording, every time we have an episode, is just that everyone's situation's different. Right. Mm-hmm. So you've got to figure out what's right and what works for you. I'm going to go on to the next point. And if you two don't mind, I'm going to start with this because this is, I think might be my favorite one. You will feel permanently happier. Now that's a myth he's saying, because retirement will not equal happiness. And the reason I like this so much is everyone that's listened consistently knows, and Erik and Adrian, you know that I'm definitely a fan of the science of happiness and want to help my clients and myself, have a happier life and have a happier retirement. And I've seen this one a lot where people feel like, especially when people didn't like their job at the end, they feel like, okay, when I leave my job, I will naturally be happier. And what the author mentions, what Sam mentions, is that one, the euphoria was gone as soon as he left. Two, he was always worried about the uncertainty, thinking, did he make the wrong decision? And he said it took him 2 years to get rid of those doubts. And finally, he said the key is continuously expressing gratitude, finding things to look forward to. All of these points he made lines right up with the science of happiness, which is why I wanted to go over this one and why it was my favorite point. What got me on this track is when I first started in the business, I felt like all day I was talking to people about retirement and what they wanted to do in retirement and how they were excited to retire. And then I had read a stat that more than half the people that retire aren't satisfied with their retirement. So that's what got me down this path. Mm-hmm. And what he expresses is what I've seen so many times with people, sometimes to the point where they're actually unhappy and miserable in retirement. So you've got to prepare and plan for that. And I don't see this touched on as often as I think it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the part that struck me about this is how much it lines up with that study that you and I and the three of us talked about earlier, which was the age wave study, and talking about the various stages of retirement. And one of those stages, which lines up with his experience, is that euphoria stage, which is typically in the work of the age wave study about a year, which is what they reported. It was about a year of euphoria and then a period of doubt and finding equilibrium. That also matches up with the age wave study. And then finally, resolution. Now, he went through those stages a little faster than what was mapped out in the age wave study. It didn't. Many people take more than a couple of years to resolve all of their, to find new social relationships to replace the ones that they had at work, or to find new patterns, or to find a new way of living with their spouse now that they're spending a lot more time together if that wasn't something they were accustomed to. But in any case, I just thought it's so interesting how those parallels at whatever age seem to have a certain degree of correspondence.
Yeah. I think all transitions, right, regardless of age, and in this case, we're talking about the transition of retirement, but I've seen the same thing with marriages, divorces, having children, that when you have this change and you're entering a different life stage, there's definitely a little bit of uncertainty, and you've got to get through that stage and be comfortable with it to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm right there with you, Roshan. And retirement and transitioning, it can sometimes be a roller coaster of emotions where you start off and it's great. You're doing everything you love. You're doing your hobbies. You're spending more time with family. But then you could have those days where you're a little bit uncertain. Are you getting everything you want out of your retirement? Are you fulfilling that picture perfect dream that you always thought about in the office? And sometimes it could be difficult if you don't feel like you're keeping pace with it. But the uncertainty and sometimes having doubts and a range of emotions is completely understandable, like you said, with that transition, because it also is a time of discovery, learning more about yourself too. So definitely being permanently happy, unless you're living your picture perfect retirement dream, that's maybe sometimes the minority, but you have to understand that you will have some ups and downs here and there, and how you respond to that is honestly sometimes one of the most important things in moving on from it, so you can enjoy your retirement after you work so hard for it, especially in this case at an early age where you're really motivated to start your retirement. So I think those are all great points that you two brought up.
I think it's an interesting contrast as well. This Sam's experience, Sam's and his wife's experience, with the experience of Jim Stannard, whom we interviewed. And in Jim's case, at least, and he didn't speak much about his wife in this respect, at least, but in his case, he said, I don't really think of it as retiring. I still am working. It was just a decision at some point to not work the same crazy amount and sort of set the limits on how much time I allocate to work so that I have the capacity to do some of these other things that I had longed to do. So fascinating contrast.
Yeah, and actually another interesting thing when you bring up that contrast is Jim sort of gradually semi-retired, right? Mm-hmm. I don't say, he won't say he's retired now. He's definitely still working. But Sam, in this article, went from, and it lines up with his next point too, he went from working 12-hour days to not working at all. And actually, I'm going to move on to the next point with this, and we can discuss it. But he said, myth number 4 is you'll be bored out of your mind. And in his experience, he said he was bored at first. And this is where he references 12-hour work days. Going from that to nothing can be disorienting, and you can only play so much tennis or golf. And he said he experimented for 2 years, found a routine, and then had children in 2017 and 2019. So he's got a lot going on now. So he went from 12-hour work days to sort of nothing, found himself, and has got a full schedule now. So I'll start with my short take on it and then hear what you guys have to say. But first is, I think this varies by individual as well. I have clients where they went from working to retirement and there was not a moment of boredom. I joke that they're harder to schedule a meeting with now that they're retired than when they were working, because they just have so many things going on. Mm-hmm. So there are definitely some people I've seen that I know will retire, be happy and flourish in their retirement. And there are others where I know they'll go through this same struggle. Mm-hmm. So Adrian or Erik, I'll ask you to start this one if you don't mind. What are your thoughts? Will you be bored out of your mind? Is that a myth, or do you think that's a fact?
I think it's a little bit of both. And like you said, it varies. I think it's really important to definitely bring a lot of diversity in your lifestyle. We also talk about diversity when it comes to investment, but diversity in your lifestyle, I think, is a key to combat boredom and discovery, to learning new hobbies, new interests that you like. And it's more important now more than ever, where you have more time, where in that case, he was working 12 hours. You have 12 hours to find something else that you like to do, or maybe go back to something you used to enjoy when you were younger and take that up again. It's really depending on how motivated you are to really bring in new stuff into your lifestyle, I think is extremely important. And like I said before, it's a roller coaster. There are times where you might be bored, but there might be times where you don't have time on your hands, so you can't schedule a meeting with Roshan. So it all varies from person to person.
Yeah, actually, Adrian, I love two of the words you use. I love, one is motivated. You had said motivated to find other things in your life. I think that's very important to be motivated to do it. And then you said new things, and I think that's important too. I always tell people who are retiring, be willing to try everything. You're not going to like some things, and that's okay. And then you're retired now. You can cut that out pretty easily. It's not like The Office where you had to go in. Erik, what are your thoughts on this point, being bored out of your mind?
Well, I certainly think it's a risk for some people, and people who need a lot of activity. And he described, for example, that in his case, he kept second guessing the decision to retire and wondering about whether all of his colleagues were getting by without his expertise that he'd cultivated over those 11 years. And he started feeling a little bit ashamed about saying, I'm not working and this sort of thing. And then he found he had to go through a period of it was I won't say, he didn't use the word crisis, but I would say sort of a wait a second, how have I allowed my thinking to get to this stage? And so then he started seeing meaning in the other things that he was doing and taking joy from those sorts of things. So I'm a softball coach. I'm a girls softball coach 3 months out of the year, or I'm a parent to my two children, or things of this kind. And I thought, it's so much. I think this is true whether we're talking about work or we're talking about volunteering or anything. It's how you see what you're doing. I mean, I think there's this classic example of these people are walking along and they see this guy and he's laying bricks, and they ask him, "So what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm laying bricks." And then they come to the next guy also on the same project and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" He says, I'm building in this case a cathedral." And then the third guy they come to and he says, "What are you doing?" And it's I'm building a cathedral for the glory of God. And so each one of them saw what they were doing in a slightly different way. And I would imagine that the third person who answers that question is not bored out of his mind because he's seeing it as richly filled with meaning. That having been said, I would still encourage everyone to think through that process that Roshan, you and I think, have both talked about doing with our clients, which is to say, take a map of a week, 7 days, break it into mornings, afternoons, evenings, and say how are you going to fill this time? You're not going to play 20 rounds of golf a week. So how are these time blocks going to be filled in a way that's satisfying and meaningful to you, and start cultivating some things that will indeed bring meaning to you and make it so that you won't feel bored out of your mind.
Yeah, I love that. And you think about retirement now, it's a totally different game, right? You've got a generation ago, you were going to retire and then die within a couple years, the average person, right? Mm-hmm. Now you're going to retire for 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. So you can really do a lot there. And Erik, you jumped ahead a little bit. I want to read this myth that you just sort of touched on already, and then we'll get Adrian's thoughts on it. But myth number 5 is you'll lose your identity and get depressed. And this is where Sam mentions that he went from saying I'm not working to saying I'm a high school. Not a problem. I just want to make sure we jump on this and keep going. I'm a high school tennis coach, a proud husband and father of 2, and I've heard clients say this. I'll tell you what, I've got what I think is an interesting take on it. I love your thoughts on it. First, I've heard clients say this, and for years I had read and I had heard from clients that this is more of a male than female issue, this loss of identity. Mm-hmm. And my thoughts on this, where I differ a little bit, is first, I don't think it has to do with male or female, because I can think of a couple clients that I work with that are women that had what I'd call high power careers, mm-hmm. right? So I think it has to do with not necessarily what your role was, but what your role was in your mind, right, at that time, right? So whether your work was more of all consuming, or did you have other stuff? But this point overall, that he calls it a myth, you will lose your identity and get depressed. I don't know about the get depressed part, but the loss of identity, I have seen that frequently enough where I would argue that it's not necessarily a myth, but his point of you can get past it, I would definitely agree with. Mm-hmm. Adrian, what would you have to say to that?
Yeah, I'm kind of back and forth on this one, but my biggest recommendation would be to find a new one. Just really discover and really push yourself in, and don't really go for an identity or a label, because not saying it's like a prison or a restriction or anything, but again, you want to maximize your potential. You want to leave the opportunity for the identity or the label to really find you in retirement, or have a broad range of them. I think is extremely important. It can be very liberating too in retirement. And I understand it's a big thing where your work life can become that identity. It can become a major part of you, but you have to make that as natural as possible. Trying to make it, again, like I said, find you, I think is a really important part of that, especially in retirement. So it can help you discover new things about yourself. Like I said previously, it can help you dig up old interests or things that you used to love to do. And it can make you more of a broad and understanding person, I think is really important.
Yeah, agreed. You definitely can go out there and find yourself and reconnect with older goals or ideas you have. Another thing I thought of as we're discussing this, though, is I had one situation where someone who retired, what's not early in Sam compared to Sam, but early in her late 50s. And I remember her saying to me that people said to her, "Why'd you retire? You could do so much more." As in, and their perspective was as in, you could work to do so much more. And her response was something to the effect of, "Well, there's a lot I want to do that I'm doing now." I was thinking of another situation with a client where his mother retired later by choice. She wanted to work longer. And then her advice to her son was, that was a mistake because you don't know how long your health will last and how long you'll be physically able to do what you want. So her advice to him was, as early as you can retire, do it, because you can always go back to work if you decide you don't like it, but you can't always get your health back.
Yeah, I think having options is really key here, and having built-in flexibility in your retirement is extremely important. So you can have a lot of different daily routines. I think is important. You can go down a lot of different routes, or you have time to maybe make mistakes and go back. Where having built-in flexibility and different ways of labeling yourself can really open up a lot of doors in retirement for you and how you want your lifestyle to be, or maybe find a new dream or challenge that dream that you had in your work setting, that I want my retirement to be like this. And then when you do transition retirement, you find something new to maybe add on to it or discover it in a new way.
And Eric, before I move on to number 6 on his list, the last one, do you have anything to add? You sort of kicked us off with this one.
Yeah, I think I since I jumped the gun, I've actually already commented on it. So let's go to number 6.
Just wanted to make sure nothing else came up. We didn't miss anything. Number 6, the 6th myth is you will die younger due to laziness and a loss of purpose. Should I start, or do either of you want to start with this one?
Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
I can start. I
Sure.
can start out with it.
Yeah.
Where I guess like the easiest answer would be no one really knows when they die. I guess you can really take into present. There's stuff you can do to prolong your life, like healthy eating habits, exercises, just really living a mentally, physically, spiritually healthy life, whatever it may be, is extremely important to help really prolong that. Just staying active is the biggest thing. And it's not just physically, mentally is also maybe one of the most important things too in retirement. Just really just pushing yourself to stay motivated and being the most happy, healthy person you can be sometimes is the best course for this. What do you think, Eric?
Well, I think it kind of depends. I mean, I would say you see some people whose works, the nature of the physical demands and time demands of their careers make it so that it's easy to say, hey, I don't have time for, and fill in the blank related to my health, eating properly or exercising or sleeping properly or whatever the case might be. And I particularly am guilty of that third one, of not really probably giving enough time for, catching Z's. But I think it's also the case that you find some people who turn that corner into retirement, and now even what sort of modest exercise they might have gotten just walking around their building or whatever the case. There's no longer even an impetus to do that, and so it becomes a lot of television time, a lot of snack time, and maybe some drink, a little bit too much drinking. So I would say if you can develop a plan and develop a determination and get some accountability, doing as he did, which he said he really it made it possible for him to spend a lot more time focusing on his physical health. I think that's great, honestly, that's one of the things I think we're going to be. We've talked about in some of our podcast planning sessions is to have a number of podcasts on nutrition and fitness and other sorts of things related to brain health, body health, so that you can enjoy more years of healthy retirement as opposed to struggling and having health compromises that make it you're living but not really able to be very active because your health has deteriorated so much. So I think let's just put it this way: it presents the opportunity, and hopefully, our listeners will seize that opportunity to make a focus on their health of a very high priority.
Yeah, Eric, and you bring up a good point, and it makes me think about in a previous podcast where we talked about support networks. Support networks are really key here. Having a group of people to maybe help motivate you or help you stay accountable or to check up on you or bounce ideas off is sometimes very crucial for some people. Just who you're going to spend your time with in retirement, who you're going to talk to, who you're going to do your hobbies with or your interests with, or someone to help you make sure you're living your retirement dreams is also really important. So having that built-in network and outlets or different resources to go to is very crucial when you decide on making that transition in retirement, knowing that you have, so to speak, like a team, or in this case, a support network to help you with your process of retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my initial reaction to this was that there's no way retirement's going to equal death, right?
Mm-hmm.
That retiring early is not going to lead to your death. But Eric, as you talked about an effort to being healthier or snack time and so on, I had a conversation with someone last week who said he retired about 7 months ago, and he said he's got 10 pounds of dessert on his body now that he didn't have before. So yeah, that can definitely be a possibility of gaining weight there. It goes back to what Adrian mentioned earlier about being motivated, trying things new, having a fitness and health routine will be very important in retirement. So I think we agree with a lot of what Sam had to say, but a few things that we would challenge him on or think that you've got to plan better for. Do either of you have anything to add on Sam's thoughts about the biggest early retirement lies, or any others that come to mind that you'd like to mention?
I'm all set, but I think we had some really good tips and some really good discussion today about retiring and the process and the transition. I think is going to be really helpful. How about you, Eric?
No, I don't have anything to add. It's a good discussion.
Excellent. And I hope you enjoyed listening to this. We want to move on to our topic this week about just living a happier life. This week, we're going over the science of happiness. I found another article I thought was pretty interesting about the stimulus check. This is one that was on Forbes, and we'll share this and the previous one on our show notes. But the headline is, man uses $1,200 stimulus check to give away 308 hoagies. Research suggests he bought himself some happiness. So what I like about this article, and you don't necessarily have to give money, it could be your time, it could be sharing what you've learned, but I've heard of people giving away the stimulus check they got and to help others, because there are people that are definitely going through really difficult times. But what this connects is that by doing this, it'll make you feel good. And the person who donated the $1,200 worth of hoagies, his name is Carl Schwenk. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. But he said that he's been going through 6 months of chemotherapy, and this is it offers something else to his mind, that he can do something good for the community and feel good. So he's helping others and helping himself. When I used to teach the Science of Happiness class, this was something mentioned in the book. In every book we would break down, they would touch on this thing about giving back. And one of the books has a story about a girl who's at an international airport. She's checking out and paying for her food, and she doesn't have the right amount in their currency. So someone behind her just said, "Hey, I'll pay for it. You're good. Don't worry about it." So my homework for our class that day was see if there's something you can give back. And then the next day I was in line at a restaurant. There was a police officer behind me, and I just said, "Hey, do you mind if I pay for your meal?" And he was like, "Yeah, that's great." So my homework to both of you and to any of our listeners is, if there's a way you can give back, something as simple as paying for someone's meal, make a phone call to someone to just be there to listen to them. It'll always make them feel good, and it'll make you feel good. Erik, Adrian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I like it. It's look for creative ways to help or give back, and those could really go a long way, and it could be a ripple effect where they'll want to do it, and it just makes it for a happy, healthier world. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. And Adrian, you're right. You make someone's day a little bit better, and they may make the next person's day a little bit better. And that's the ripple effect. So to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us again. We appreciate you joining us for another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show. We'll be back next week. Please like, subscribe, give us 5 stars. And, we are on YouTube now as well, so you can feel free to watch us as opposed to just listening to us. Thanks again. This has been another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show.